Hey Savvy people, it's Savvy Nick here, and today we'll be going through how to use a software called VirtualBox and walking through all of its features, and then we'll go ahead and begin an install of a Linux operating system. VirtualBox is great for testing out operating systems, and it makes it super easy to deploy an operating system without changing anything that's currently installed on your computer. This makes it a great candidate for trying out Linux distributions before you actually go ahead and install them on a bare metal system, like your physical computer. Lots of people want to try out Linux, but they just don't know where to get started. Well, this is a great place to start and give it a try before jumping in and installing it on your physical system. So I'm here on the virtualbox.org website, and you can learn even more about VirtualBox here. I'll make sure to go ahead and put a link in the description below. What I want to do on this website is go ahead and just download VirtualBox just to show you where and how to get it. We have this big download VirtualBox 6.1, the current version, right in the middle. So we're going to click on that. And then we have a few options here for us. We have the Windows hosts, OS X, Linux distributions, and Solaris. So what we want, since I have a Windows computer here and I want to host it on that, I'm going to select Windows. So if you have an OS X platform where you have a Mac or a MacBook, you can go ahead and get the OS X version. And of course, if you have a Linux distribution, you can go ahead and install it for Linux as well. Well, since we're putting it on Windows, I'm going to go ahead and get Windows, and it'll automatically begin downloading. If you're new and stopping by to watch a video today, make sure to go ahead and subscribe below and hit the notification bell for more videos. So after you're finished downloading, what we want to do is go ahead and install VirtualBox, which is very similar to installing any other program that you would on your Windows computer. Again, you can do this for Linux as well as Mac. So I'm going to select VirtualBox and just launch it real quick. And it'll begin the setup here. Let's just go through the steps. Everything by default should be just fine. I don't want to create a shortcut, neither in the desktop or the quick launch bar. I'm going to go ahead and hit next, and now it says it's just going to go ahead and finish up. It does warn you that it might reset the network connection, so just be aware of that. And then I'm going to hit yes and install and give it administrative privileges in order to go ahead and finish up the installation. This should be pretty quick. And it says here that we can start Oracle VM VirtualBox after the installation. Do we want to do that? Sure, why not? If you don't select this option, you can always search for it and just start it. So VirtualBox is an open source software for virtualization of machines. Simply put, you can emulate a computer through the use of this software. And as you can see here in front of me, I have VirtualBox open now. So it's just some quick information about VirtualBox. It's developed by Oracle, and thanks to them, we have a very powerful free virtualization software, which is more than suitable for most computers. I suggest having at least 4 gigabytes of RAM on your computer in order to go ahead and run this application. So you hear me say virtualization. That just refers to a process where you create a virtual machine in an emulated environment, such as VirtualBox. And a virtual machine is just a platform that runs an emulated computer with the hardware and resources that are available alongside your main computer in a virtual environment. I know that all sounds confusing, but just know that you can use your already existing computer to create more virtual computers, and they share resources together. So let me go ahead and show you around the software. And the first thing that we have here is tools. So this is just the welcome screen. And what we have available to us is preferences, importing, exporting, new, and add. So as far as importing and exporting, you can always import or export a virtual machine that you create in order to move it from this computer to another one, or import it from another computer into this one. New allows you to create a new virtual machine, and add allows you to add an existing one if you've removed it from the software. In preferences, we can see the global preferences available to VirtualBox. Some of the things is a default machine folder where it's going to store your VMs, as well as input devices and what you want to use with the virtual environment. You can also set the frequency of updates and checking for them, as well as language support for anyone who wants something else than the default English. You can go through here and set that. Displays allows you to change the various settings for displays. Normally, you want to go ahead and just set the maximum guest size screen to none. That way, you can change the size willingly with whatever you install in your virtual machine. Network, we won't really worry about. You also have extensions that you can add and even proxies to use. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of here. By default, all the preferences are pretty much good as is. unless you want to change the language that you want to use. So a few more things up here in the left-hand corner. There's really not much here that you have to use besides new and then creating your machine. There is file, which also gets you in preferences. It gives you all the buttons that we just went through. But it has a few more options if you want to go ahead and look at this. There's really nothing here for beginners, so we won't really go through these options. But in the machine, it just gives you an option to create a new one or add one, just like we have in the Tools menu. Help allows you to go to the website, their forums, and read about your current VirtualBox version. So let's go ahead and start creating our first virtual machine. So all we have to do is hit the new button in order to do so. And really, there's two modes here. The more advanced mode, which allows you to go ahead and create a virtual machine real quick. But let's go ahead and use the guided mode since we're beginners here. In the guided mode, it's going to take you step by step that VirtualBox needs in order to go ahead and create your virtual machine. So here it says name and operating system. So what we'll do is we can name this virtual machine anything we want. So I'm just going to call it Kali instance, since I have Kali here to install on this virtual machine. Following that, it says the machine folder. So like we looked at, the default is currently in this directory. You can change what directory that is by hitting the drop down arrow and hitting other and changing it up. Otherwise, keep it what it is by default. That works perfectly fine for me. Just know you'll find your virtual machines in this folder if you ever need to look for them. The type is going to be the operating system type that we want to run. Well, Linux is the one I want to run, but you can see all the different versions that you can run in here in a virtual environment. So you can run Microsoft Windows, Linux, or Mac OS X if you want. There's also other ones that you can run as well. We won't talk about those today. So I want to go ahead and select Linux. Now the version is the type of architecture that you want to run in your virtual machine. So right now, it's set to Oracle 64-bit. If we hit the drop down, you can see that there's already pre-built architectures for various different distributions here. So we have such things as Arch Linux, Debian, Fedora, Gentoo, and many more. Now, if you're not sure of which one you should select, maybe you're trying to install a different Linux distribution other than the ones that are listed, you would hit the Other Linux. And of course, you have the option between 32-bit emulation and 64-bit emulation. Most images nowadays are deployed in a 64-bit architecture, so more than likely you'll want to select one of the 64-bit versions. So instead here, since I'm going to try and install Kali on here, I know Kali is based off Debian, so I can go ahead and select the Debian 64-bit architecture. I think that one will work the best for us. So I'm going to go ahead and select Debian. You can always select whichever one you're trying to install on your computer, and then hit Next. Following that, we're asked how much memory do we want to allocate to this virtual machine. So here it gives me the amount that I have for the entire computer, the physical computer. Well, I don't want to use up all my resources, otherwise I'm going to bog down my own computer. Instead, I want to give the virtual machine plenty to work with, but not enough to starve my own system. So I have like I said, 32 gigs available. I'm just going to go ahead and give it 8 gigs because that gives me plenty left to my own system, 24 gigs, but you'll mainly need about 2 gigs to run any Linux operating system. As it says here, the recommended memory size is at least 1 gig, but like I said, most Linux distributions are going to require 2 gigs or more. 8 gigs works fine for me. I'm going to go ahead and select Next. Following this, we get to create a hard disk. Now you do have 3 options here. You don't have to add a virtual hard disk if you don't want to. You can create a new one now. And then the last option is to use an existing one. So if you want to just attach to one that's already existing on your computer, let's say you created one in the past and you want to bring it up under a different name, or you just want to bring it up because you've gotten rid of it in VirtualBox, you can do that through this last option. The one we want is to, of course, create a virtual hard disk now because we don't have one. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the create button. Following that, we get options on different types of virtual hard disks. They're just different formats. VDI is the default for VirtualBox because it is of a VirtualBox type of image. You also have VHD or VMDK. These are better suited if you plan on migrating your virtual machine over to different virtualization softwares. But since I'm going to keep mine in VirtualBox, I'm going to go ahead and select a default option, VDI, and hit next. Following that, we can set a fixed size or a dynamically allocated size. Basically, all this means is dynamically allocated will automatically resize your virtual hard disk every time it needs more space. A fixed size will only give you a fixed amount of space. Dynamically allocated usually works best just because if you do have an operating system that can keep extending itself, it's better to have this option than not to. So I usually just go ahead and hit the default to dynamically allocate and hit next. Following that, you can see that it's creating a VDI file, and now we get to choose what size of VDI we want to create for our computer. You can see here that you can create up to 2 terabytes. That doesn't mean that your system has 2 terabytes because it won't actually use up all of this allocated space that you select for your virtual hard disk because the install isn't going to really take this much. But this is basically, you're saying this is the limit where my virtual disk can grow to. So I'm going to go ahead and put 32 gigs. And why 32 gigs? Well, mainly because if you don't put 32 gigs in, some Linux distributions like Debian will have a hard time installing. I've noticed that in previous attempts. So I like to just go ahead and put 32 in at least. You can always select more and you can try less, but you might fail in installing your Linux distribution. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create after I've selected the size of my storage space and hit create. And now we're getting really close to running our virtual machine. Another neat thing about VirtualBox is that it's available for most platforms, including macOS X, Windows, and Linux. It really doesn't matter what system you are using because the layout of VirtualBox doesn't really change, so you'll be familiar with it on any host platform that you choose to run it on. Alright, now that we have our Kali instance over here of a virtual machine, it says it's powered off. Well, before we power it on, I'm going to go ahead and look through properties now that we have this option. So before we turn it on, I'm going to go ahead and look at the settings for this virtual machine. So if you have it selected, you'll get a couple more buttons here, and I'm going to go to settings and we get a new dialog. Here you get to go ahead and select between your settings, and you get more options for your system here because we didn't select anything for our processor and we didn't get to choose what type of BIOS we want to run. So we can set that all up in here. As you can see here, we have the Linux Debian 64-bit, which we did select, and you have the Advanced tab here that allows you to look at where your snapshots are saved, as well as if you want to enable shared clipboard and drag and drop. This allows you to go ahead and share anything that you copy in your host computer, so this Windows computer that I have here, into the installed virtual machine. It's a very nice option to have, so usually I like to go ahead and enable bidirectional access to both of these, so I can share between the host operating system and the one that I'm installing in VirtualBox. Next is description. You can put anything in that you want there, and you can also enable or disable disk encryption here. In our system settings, we get to look through motherboard, processor, and acceleration here. We have base memory set to what we set it to, and then a boot order here. You can actually select these and move them up and down based on what order you want to run things. So if you want to start your hard disk before a floppy or optical disk, you can actually move these around. You can emulate chipsets. So there's two different chipsets you can select from. Usually the default is fine. A pointing device, if you want to enable that, you can emulate a PS2 mouse or multi-touch tablet as well. Extended features allow you to go ahead and enable EFI BIOS support. So this one, for many Linux systems, if you want to go ahead and try UEFI BIOS, you can select this option in order to go ahead and emulate it. It's nice to do because most computers do come with EFI BIOS support, so to stay up to date, that's a good one to select. Following that, if you do have some cores available, you can go ahead and specify them in here. I'm going to go ahead and allocate 2 cores for mine since I have 8 available. You can also set an execution cap for each core and enable more advanced settings, which we won't mess with. Acceleration, we won't mess with either. Let's just keep it at default. Display allows you to change display settings around, such as the video memory available. I do like to up this a little bit since I have plenty available to myself, but the default's fine. You can also enable 3D acceleration in here and change the type of graphics controller. Remote display and recording we won't go through. Storage, this is an important place to note because here's where various devices can be attached and added. So if you want a new storage controller, you can go ahead and select this button, and as you can see, there's various different types of buses available to us. So you can even select an NVMe PCI Express bus and then put in a SSD so you can emulate that type of hardware. I'm just going to keep it the standard SATA, but you can also remove and add new storage attachments to the controllers that you already have. But by default, you're going to have a SATA controller with a hard disk. And the other important one is this controller IDE with an empty disk right now. So it says there's no disk image file selected. So why is this important? It's because this is where you get to select ISOs or images in order to go ahead and install them on the virtual machine. So we do have one that we want to install, so we can go ahead and choose a disk file or a virtual optical disk. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose a disk file. So you can see here I have Kali Linux 2020 available to me, the AMD 64-bit architecture. I'm going to go ahead and select that image. If you need help installing and downloading Kali Linux, go ahead and do my Kali Linux install tutorial on my channel. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description below. And I have many more install tutorials for many different Linux distributions, so check them out if you need help. I'm going to go ahead and select open. And now you can see that my disk has been attached here, and I can go ahead and hit OK. But we're going to go ahead and finish going through these last few things here. So we have audio. You can enable it or disable it. If you don't want to listen to anything in your virtual machine, you don't have to. Network. This one's important to know because this is what enables an emulation of a network adapter. As you can see, it's enabled currently, and you have up to 4 adapters. By default, it's attached to NAT, which means it's just going to go ahead and share the network on your host with the network on the virtual machine. Otherwise, you can select between other things. You can go ahead and simply not attach an adapter at all. Host only adapter, so keep it only at the host and not at the virtual machine. Or a bridge adapter, which allows you to create a completely emulated and isolated network adapter at the virtual machine, meaning you can have its own IP address and it doesn't have to share IP addresses with the host. Otherwise, by default, NAT is fine and it will work in most cases. You'll just have to share an IP address. Serial ports, we won't really care about. USBs here, you can emulate different types of controllers. So if you have a USB 3.0 that you want to go ahead and attach, you might want to go ahead and use the 3.0 controller. Of course, USBs are backwards compatible, so it doesn't really matter. That's why they have the 2.0 selected, since most computers nowadays at least have support for 2.0. Shared folders allows you to share folders between the host and the virtual machine that you're creating. And user interface we won't really get into, but it just allows you to change up a toolbar that you can use while you're using the virtual machine. Alright, with all that being said, let's go ahead and hit OK to exit out of this dialog and submit our settings. And now we can go ahead and launch the Kali instance of a virtual machine. We double click on it and give it a few moments here to start up. As you can see here, it says select a startup disk. It's just verifying that you want to go ahead and select that Kali Linux that we already selected. And I do, so I'm going to hit start. And now after it starts up, you can see right here, we have Kali Linux live boot menu, meaning we can start installing Kali on this system. We can either go to the live system or the start installer option. I'm going to go ahead and load into the live system real quick just to kind of watch that and see. One way to get out is to hit the control and then it'll free up your mouse. And if you look up here, we really have just a few options. It allows you to get into preferences, reset any warnings. We have the machine where we can take a snapshot, which is a quick image of where you're currently at. It will save all your settings, any files that you have. It's a great feature to use. It does take up some space, but it allows you to go ahead and create a snapshot and then go back to the snapshot that you created at an earlier date in case you mess things up. So it's a very good thing to know about. Make sure that you look that up. Other things are pausing and resetting the virtual machine as well as shutting it down if things aren't cooperating. We have different modes for full screen and scaled mode. If we go to full screen and hit switch, you'll see now that we get the entire screen filled up with our virtual machine, and it looks much like we have only Kali Linux installed on here. Of course, sometimes you'll have to mess with the display properties in the actual operating system in order to get it to something that looks a little better for you. Since I haven't installed the guest tools, I'm going to go ahead and have to go with something not quite right for my system, but it should do okay. As you can see here, a little bit too big, but it's fine for these purposes. If I want to get out of the full screen view, I can always go down to the bottom here and hit exit or minimize it. And then we can go back into the view, and let's just do the scale mode so you can kind of see that one as well. What the scale mode allows you to do is actually scale the virtual machine to whatever size you currently have. This is nice too, so you can get in and out of the virtual machine real quick and not have to change the resolution around a bunch of times. So I'm going to go back into full screen and just look at a few more things here. So we looked at view. We can also change and scale the output of our virtual machine, as well as take a screenshot here and recording as well. If we look back down, we have devices, so you can change up devices while the machine is currently on if you want. Let's say you want to connect a USB up. You can do it through there, as well as share folders and change up settings and insert the guest edition CD image, which I do suggest you do, but I can't do it right now because we currently have our disk full of the installer, so it gives me an error. But once you've installed whatever Linux distribution you want, you will be able to go ahead and put guest editions in, so you can install that and it'll help with your screen resolution and a bunch of other stuff. Last option here is help. If you need help, it allows you to go to the forum or the website. Otherwise, I'm going to hit exit and actually power off the machine. You can always power it off through the actual dialog of your operating system as well, but just to make things a little quicker, I'm going to go through there. Last couple things here, so you can go ahead and take another screenshot in here. So if you got your current state is powered down and you want to take a snapshot, you can go ahead and do it. As well as clone the virtual machine, which allows you to make two of them. Let's say you want to go ahead and you like the setup that you currently have. You can clone it and keep messing with the one that you have in front of you, but make sure not to mess it up. Otherwise, you can hit the start button to start it back up with a few other options underneath. Really it for VirtualBox. I hope you enjoyed going through this walkthrough and use of VirtualBox. I plan on installing various different types of operating systems, mainly focusing on Linux. So if you have a suggestion of what Linux distribution you want me to install on VirtualBox here in the upcoming weeks, let me know in the comments section below. And also let me know if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions. Please post them in that comments section. And also make sure to subscribe for future videos and make sure to like the video. Thanks for watching.